We will now request Jem to come up and talk about investor presentation deck. This is about 20 minutes presentation to investors. Jem, Dennis.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see everyone. Just for those of you that don't know me, I am your host tonight. So this is our office. I'm with Fasken Martineau. I'm the firm's entrepreneur in residence. While I am a lawyer, I don't practice law. I went straight a long time ago. And I basically mentor early stage companies, and through the firm I help early stage companies get to the next level. In fact, there's some familiar faces in the room. And usually people come to me for money, but often there's a bunch of stuff that needs to get done before people are eligible for money. And then, of course, I'm surrounded by 800 lawyers that if people need shareholder agreements and financings and patents and all that good stuff, we can do that sort of thing. I want to draw to everyone's attention before I start the formal presentation. There were these little brochures out on the desk out in front. You can grab one at the break or on the way home. Basically, we're seeing a lot of companies who go through the lean startup methodology, take advantage of all the collaboration and creativity, but really haven't looked after some of the legal foundations around it. And there's a lot of pitfalls that people can fall into because of ownership of technology and who owns what and so forth that they don't really think about while they're pivoting and iterating and all the rest of it. So while that creative process is really good and important, we're finding a lot of people are getting into trouble when they go look for money because they don't have their ducks in a row and they don't pass due diligence. So we created this program for startups. It's kind of, you've heard of software as a service. Well, this is law as a service. So it's a subscription model. It's $2,000 over the course of 12 months. There's all sorts of benefits, incorporation, trademark, some advice, meet with me once a month. There's probably $20,000 worth of value that we're offering to people at a very low price to get you in the door sooner and talk about some of these issues before you step in it. And so it's just something you should be aware of, and I wanted to make sure you knew about it. This presentation is actually online. I did it as well for the Thai Quest, so I think you can find it at Thai's website. It's a bit of an abbreviated version, but it's basically the same presentation. I see people like you guys all the time telling me their story, showing me their plans. I spent most of my career investing, and so I really look at these things and your business opportunities from an investor's perspective. And so this presentation really is focused on that. And what I'm going to do is really, and in fact, a great resource, there's a book, many of you are probably aware of it, called The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki. And there's a short form version called Perfecting the Pitch. It's on the garage.com website. This really is my version of that. I agree a lot with what Guy says, and I want to give credit where credit is due. But this is really the basic investor presentation. And while I agree with much of what Basim said, what you'll find is no one will read your business plan. They will look at your deck and they will hear your pitch, but they often won't get beyond that executive summary. And I think doing the business plan, while it's a really important exercise because it forces you to go through all the things that my colleague referred to, and the discipline around figuring out what the market is, who your customers are, what you're going to charge, what your marketing strategy is, what your projections look like, all that discipline in preparing that makes you ready to go answer the questions from the investors. But don't be surprised if they don't read it. But what they will look at is your slide deck. And so the question is, how do you stand out in the crowd, right? All of you have great ideas. There's other rooms and other events and other places, and Mars and DMZ and Communitech, and everybody's coming up with the latest and greatest idea. They're passionate about it, they're committed to it, just like all of you. But how do you stand out? So my suggestion is that you start by telling a story about the pain, right? Your product, your service is solving a big pain. And if it isn't, then you're probably wasting your time and you got to come up with something else. But you know what the investor's looking for is, what is that pain? And in telling your pitch and making your pitch, telling a story that people can understand about how you experienced that pain. I was working in this field and it was horrible. So I came up with this really great product or service to improve it, to disrupt it, and to illustrate it, and so that people can really understand what that pain is. After you've established what the pain is, obviously you're going to have this cover slide, and it's very basic. It's got all the key information, and you know what that is. But one of the things that you want to have is that, you know, we'll call it the elevator pitch, that one thing that you say in the elevator or out in networking when somebody says, well, so what do you do, or what's your business, or whatever. What's that one sentence that quickly defines what you do? In my case, I'm the trusted advisor to the CEOs of fast growth companies. I can say that in my sleep. In fact, I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night saying it. And everybody around me, you know, think in those terms. All my assistant, the team that we've built here, we want to be the trusted advisors to the CEOs of fast growth companies. That's who we are, what we do, and I can say it any time, and it's like a mantra. You need that, whatever it is for you. The first slide really is an overview. In my experience, you want to tell people what you're going to tell them, so have a bit of an agenda. Tell them, and at the end, remind them what you told them, right? And so the first slide really reinforces, you know, what's that pain? What's your solution to the pain? And what's the target market? Like, who's this for? And your status, where you are on your journey. Have you launched? Have you got customers? Etc. So this is where we dig deeper into the pain. You know, what's the market? What problem are we solving? You know, what's the size of the problem? And who are your customers? This third slide really is your product or service. You know, what is your solution? What's your offering? Where do you fit in the value chain? Are you selling to consumers? Are you selling to other businesses? How does that work? Who is your customer? And this is key. You want to be considered a must-have product. Not nice to have, must-have. If your investor listening to you comes away with the impression that there's a big pain and you have the must-have solution, you're halfway there. Obviously, in demonstrating what the must-have solution is and why it's must-have, you've got to identify what the key benefits and features of your product, and of course who the beneficiaries are. So the next slide really talks about what's unique about you. You know, do you have proprietary intellectual property? Do you have a network that you control? What are the competitive advantages that make you have market share, or going to enable you to have market share so that you can fend off your competition? You want to talk about how you compare to the competitors. So don't be afraid of identifying who your competitors are. Don't say, I have no competition. If you have no competition, then probably you have no market, right? So that's not a good idea. There may be competition that's, you know, bricks and mortar, and you're an e-commerce solution. There may be competition that competes in certain aspects. And one of the things you want to do, and the way to compare yourself with competition, is with a really clear slide like this, where you have this matrix where, you know, I'm talking about my presentation. So, you know, versus the other presenters, I'm identifying the pain. I'm giving you a clear solution. You have a must-have solution. I'm articulate and I'm making eye contact with you. And these are understandable slides that are nice and big. And the other presenters, not so much. And you want to make it clear how you stand out against the crowd. I'm being facetious, you know that. You know, what's your go-to-market strategy? Do you have customers yet? If not, who are they going to be? What strategic partners do you have? How are you going to get there? You know, what are your assets in terms of people and relationships? What's your business model? How are you going to make money? You know, is this as a service? Is it a product? You know, is it e-commerce? Is it hand-to-hand selling to B2B? Is it, you know, how are you going to go to market? What's your pricing? What's your margin? And what's your profitability? And be prepared to defend some of these key assumptions. That's where the business plan writing and thinking comes into place, because, you know, everybody will put it out there that we're going to buy low, sell high. Okay, so prove it. And what are your assumptions? And what's the market saying? And what's your competition charging? So you got to be prepared to defend all that stuff. And you may be asked sensitivity analysis questions, i.e., you know, if the assumptions are this, but what happens if we have half the number of people, or half the price, or more expense? I wouldn't show them up front. I'd have them in my appendixes. But be prepared to answer questions about your assumptions and what happens if those assumptions vary. You got to prove that you understand this, that they can trust you, that you know the business. That brings us to the financial projections. This is where you get to show your hockey stick, right? Up and to the right. You want to demonstrate and show what your key metrics are, what your assumptions are, who your customers, what unit sales, what prices. Maybe there's new verticals, new markets. You know, you'll show that, and you'll have to explain why those things are happening. Why are you getting that uptick? We're entering a new market. We brought on a new product. Whatever the reason is, you've got to be able to link your milestones and expectations and goals with those projections. Visually, it's better to use a simple graph. People can't read the little numbers. You can have the appendix slide and handouts and business plans and all the and projections and all the package of financial information that you can give later. But for a presentation of 15 or 20 minutes, you don't have time to get into that detail. So you want to just give them an overview showing, you know, what it's going to look like. Be reasonable. Everybody uses the word conservative. My projections are really conservative because, well, everybody says that. Be realistic. Be reasonable. Don't use the word conservative. It's just overdone. And again, be prepared to defend your assumptions. This is, and I agree with what was said earlier, this is probably the most important slide. Because people don't invest in businesses, people invest in people. So who is your team? And you want to be able to demonstrate that you can drag this ball over the goal line because you've surrounded, because of your background and the team that you put together, that you have what it takes to take this project home. I've seen people funded without a business because they've had track record and they've had previous exits. Okay? People invest in people, so this is critical. If you have mentors, advisors, board members, and they add value like you heard before, include them. If you've got customers that are name brand and recognizable, we have a contract with Walmart, include that. It gives you heft and credibility, but be honest. Like, don't overstate it. If you don't have the relationship or you're just negotiating, don't mislead them. But if you do have a contract, you do have a relationship, proudly talk about it. Don't be afraid to mention that who your lawyers are. The last slide is how much money you need. What are your requirements? Be very clear about how much money. Talk about what your use of funds are going to be. Could be broad strokes, you know, development, marketing, hiring people, burn rate, whatever. You don't have to go into that level, too much detail beyond that. Have the backup. It's in your business plan. It's in the appendix. It's in the projections. But just, again, know it and be really conversant so you can answer questions and be confident about it. And again, we heard it before, link your funding requirements to milestones. We're going to need X dollars to get to launch. We need more money to get us to beta, and then public launch, and why. And then you want to summarize. Tell them what they heard. Like I said, tell them what they're going to hear, tell them, and then tell them what they heard. And then restate. I'm the trusted advisor to the CEOs of fast-growing companies. Bang, you're done, right? 15 minutes Q&A, you're home free. So these are just some tips, do's and don'ts, best practices. You know, this is a little bit subjective. Everybody has their own style. My philosophy is you craft your pitch to a grade 8 audience. You know, they could be the gifted class, but, you know, don't assume too much knowledge. Investors often see many deals from many industries and many products, and they're not experts. So you gotta dumb it down. You gotta put it in plain language that they can understand. Talk slowly, talk clearly, make eye contact. I mean, all that stuff that you learned at Dale Carnegie or wherever it was, you know, it's a good time to bring that to the fore. Shy away from industry jargon and lingo. You know, it could be confusing. Again, dumb it down. Use stories, as I said earlier. I think stories are really important. People understand it, they get it better. It's much harder to explain things in the abstract. Drop names. If there's an honest, you know, fact that you have these relationships, don't be afraid to talk about your strategic partners, who your advisors are, who's on your board, who your key customers are. If they're important relationships, don't be afraid to share them. Stay within your time limit and leave some time for Q&A. You know, before you do your pitch, time it, practice, know what you're doing, and leave yourself 5 minutes for Q&A. Again, be honest and don't overstate. I talked about conservative versus realistic and reasonable. Big font. Judges tend to be judges and investors, judges at these business plan competitions. I did this for the Thai Quest. But judges and investors tend to be closer in age to me than you guys. So they want to see what I call the 10-20-30 rule. 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 font. Right? And then don't rely too much on the slides. You want them to look at you. You want them to listen to you. In fact, often I work without slides. The only reason you want to have slides is kind of as that reminder. Sometimes it's good to have a little picture, an image, you know, like I did at the beginning where, you know, how do you stand out in the crowd? Makes the point. People sort of look, smile, and then listen to me instead of focusing and trying to read all the stuff that they can't read because the font's too small. So, in summary, you have to have a must-have solution to a big pain. There has to be a large addressable market, a description of your competitive advantage, a viable business model, and a track team with a team with a track record that can drag this ball over the goal line. And if you do, you'll get all the money you need. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. We can do it at the end.
And we can take a couple of questions from both Basim and Jeff.
Come on up.
Any questions?
By the way, he makes me feel really, really old. He was in my son's class at UCC. So it's making me like, I can't even believe, I just emailed Matt to tell him that. Matt, that's funny. So yeah, any questions?
Yes. Can I ask you about like the hockey stick that you talked about in financials? Like, it's really hard to project as an entrepreneur how much money the company will make. Why is it so important to have that hockey stick? And I mean, you could just almost put in any numbers and make any assumptions to get that. Like,
I think the message that you wanted to drive across, it's visual, is that this is a big opportunity, right? That there's a big market and we're going to get it. But I think it comes to, you know, your presentation. It's about those projections. Like, you know, doing your financial projections, they have to be really detailed. You're not going to put them in your presentation, but you're going to have them in the backup, right? And so if the investor says, yeah, let's drill down, you're going to give this package of, you know, 3 years historicals, if you have them, you know, 5 years or 3 years projections, and it's going to have all these assumptions, and then you're going to have to defend those assumptions. And if those assumptions sound crazy, you know, I'm going to sell $1 billion. Okay, how are you going to do that, right? So you have to be realistic, as I said, but you want it to look like this, and if it doesn't, then that probably tells you that you're not going to get funded. You know, maybe a good business, but it may not be attractive to a professional investor.
And just to add, also, when you're applying multiples, you know, multiples from a specific industry, obviously you should be getting into an industry where there's opportunity. So if you're applying those multiples into your growth and trying to indicate what the growth is, that should indicate a hockey stick, hopefully, as well.
You have to defend it. That's the bottom line. Any other questions? You know, I want to share a story. I went to the InCube's demo day. In fact, I went to InCube's at the beginning. I went to their mentor day. And I met the three companies. And I was not that impressed at the beginning, to tell you the truth. And one of the guys had a huge disadvantage because English was not his first language. And he really struggled to communicate to us at this mentor day what the idea was and what the business was. And I kind of felt badly for him. And I wasn't sure whether it was him or the idea that I didn't like. I mean, not that I didn't like him, but that I didn't understand. Meanwhile, you know, 3 months go by and I show up 2 weeks ago at their demo day. This guy wowed the audience in a second language, okay? So it doesn't really matter that English isn't your first language. It's not really about, you know, perfect syntax and whatnot. This guy was just spoke slowly and clearly and got it out and had great slides, and he was terrific. And I just gave the guy huge credit because he could have easily been a disaster just because he wasn't a good presenter, but it turned out he was. He worked at it, and I think they did really well.
And I just want to add to what Jeff is saying here as well. I think also branding yourself as an expert, it sets your own language, and it also allows you to showcase that you're an expert in what you're talking about as well. And when people see you as an expert, they identify you as an expert, and therefore they listen and they're receptive as well. So branding yourself as an expert, social media is excellent for that. If you're really, you know, passionate about what you do, chances are that's the business that you're getting into if you're diving into entrepreneurship. So if you're an expert in what you're trying to do, you should be able to speak about it passionately and whatnot, not just in front of people, but online as well. And, you know, distributing content that, you know, is effective.
Any other, are we done? Any other questions?
Here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, first of all, that investors probably won't read our business plan, but when you have a very technologically based company, and if they don't read the business plan, and then I mean, you can describe the pain very well, but to assess the technology, they have to consult at some point with other people. So what's the procedure there?
They'll do a deeper dive in due diligence, but you're going to. But this is really to get your foot in the door, right? You got 15 minutes to make a first impression. That's what my presentation's about. I mean, you know, we can talk at another time, or maybe one of the other presentations will talk about the deeper dive and due diligence. But this is really to communicate, you know, what the market is, what's the pain, and what's your solution. And I don't care how complex it is, you should be able to dumb it down enough so that anybody in this room can understand what the pain is and then what the solution is. And I see, you know, medical device technology all the time, and I am not a scientist, and I don't understand, you know, how they make this magic work. But I understand the pain, and I understand how it solves it, and how the magic works behind it. That's for the engineers and the technical people. And if you can persuade them that that's, you know, that they want to learn more, then you'll get a chance to, you know, share your patents, and, you know, that they want to read the business plan or see a demonstration or whatever it is to better understand the technology.
Or having a demonstration, something as close to a prototype as possible, that also indicates that you reached a certain stage. So getting as close to a prototype can help.
And for software, you know, apps and websites, I mean, I've seen people go to market for money, certainly at the angel stage, with things as simple as screenshots. So you don't actually have to do the coding if you know, I mean, it's helpful to have a working demo. But if you're going to friends and family to raise that first $50,000 just to get the coding done, you know, get a buddy or somebody to do some nice screenshots to give people an idea of what it would look like. You can do it on an iPad and flip through, and they just, oh yeah, I see. Oh, you know, it's visual is a lot easier to understand than, you know, oral. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Fasken.